You're listening to How to Win Friends and Save the Republic, a podcast from the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. I'm your host, Andy Moore. My guest today is Katie Fahey. Katie grew up in Michigan and attended Aquinas College in Grand Rapids, where she studied sustainable business and community leadership. She began her career in the garbage and recycling industry, but in late 2016, a little over 5 years ago, Katie made a now infamous Facebook post about gerrymandering that changed her life. Now, I don't want to spoil the whole story because that's a lot better when Katie tells it honestly, and we'll get to it in just a minute. But the highlights are that her Facebook post led to a community meeting, and that led to a whole bunch of community meetings, and those led to the formation of an organization and a movement called Voters Not Politicians. And they led a successful statewide ballot initiative campaign to amend the Michigan state constitution and create an independent redistricting commission for their state. Katie is now the executive director of an organization called The People, whose mission is to empower individuals to get involved in the political process, and they support a number of democracy reforms, including, but not limited to, open primaries, ranked choice voting, and independent redistricting. Welcome to the program, Katie Fahey.
Hello, Andy, and thank you so much for having me.
We're so glad you're here. Katie and I have gotten to know one another over the last few years through democracy reform. Well, specifically because I also worked on an anti-gerrymandering campaign, and you couldn't go anywhere and say the word gerrymandering without Katie's name coming up. And so I'm really excited to have you on the show this week. Katie, let's go to the beginning, as we do with all of our guests, and talk about life growing up in your home there in Michigan. Was politics something that was discussed in your home? Were either of your parents particularly active in the community?
Politics really wasn't talked about. At family gatherings, I had one uncle who was definitely a Democrat and one uncle who's definitely a Republican. So it was kind of all of us cousins would sit around and have no idea what they were talking about, but they'd get really heated and stand up and yelling and wave their arms around. And so I think that's one of my earliest memories. But in regards to my direct family, my parents, I knew who they voted for and that they voted, but didn't know much beyond that. Although my dad worked for the Veterans Administration in Detroit, and that I think actually did really inform my opinion of public policy being really important and just how linked government with different societal issues is. So we definitely are in a family that volunteered a lot, was really actively involved in the community, but more from the government side of things rather than the politics side of things.
Yeah, I think, I am probably guilty of using those two words, politics and government, interchangeably when I'm talking about civic life, right? And we don't, I think in the minds of most people, they're probably separate entities, right? Government is a thing that exists, right? There are institutions or agencies, and then politics is this other gross system that we see on TV, right? It's politics is the reality TV show about government on some level, like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think at least in my mind, that's how it has come to be.
Now, according to your Wikipedia page, which I think we all know you've arrived when you have a Wikipedia page, but it says that you studied sustainable business and community leadership. Is that the correct title? And was that one degree or kind of two separate degrees?
They are two separate degrees. Yeah. And they're kind of unique degrees. I didn't really know what I wanted to do coming out of high school, and I toured Aquinas, which was actually smaller than my high school. Did not think I would go to a college that was smaller than my high school, but fell in love with the idea of these two major sustainable businesses. Basically, how do you take environmental, social-oriented business practices and put them in place in business to help drive what they call the triple bottom line, but creating better profit, better atmospheres for people, and a better environment. And then community leadership was basically a fancy title for a public administration degree. So how do you also work either for government or for nonprofits? And I didn't know that if I wanted to work in business or work in nonprofits or work related to government. And now, a couple of years after graduating, I guess I've worked in all three.
Funny how that works, isn't
it?
Now, I don't even want to guess how many times that you have told the origin story of Voters Not Politicians over the last 5 years. But I do want to ask, did you ever imagine, thinking back to your days at Aquinas, that your life would take this kind of turn and that you end up where we are today?
Definitely not. No. I think especially because like amending the state constitution on something, especially I had purposely kind of stayed away from what we were talking about a little bit earlier, the politics side of things. Really liked government, liked voting, really liked local elections, like who's going to be the drain commissioner, that kind of thing. But I don't think I ever imagined myself having to run a political campaign, let alone being at the center of one, and even having things like negative political campaigns involving me, or having to help create positive ones about what an independent redistricting commission could mean. It all still feels surreal.
I I've heard the Voters Not Politicians campaign described many ways, one of which was as a unicorn, like a campaign unlike others. And I think some people attribute its success to, a magical mix of timing, the unique statewide politics at the time, a charismatic leader in you. But now that we're several years past the campaign and the commission is actually out there doing redistricting work as we speak, I'm a little curious. How do you, Katie Fahey, how do you view the VNP campaign, and to what do you attribute its success?
I definitely view it as a huge success. And I think it took a lot of hard work and the brilliance and brains of thousands of people coming together to want to make a difference in a genuine way. And since us doing that in 2018, I actually have found that there are similar campaigns that have happened across the country where it was a group of concerned citizens who one day just kind of had enough, found each other, and were like, we're just going to stay persistent. Just staying persistent doesn't always guarantee that you'll still be able to navigate all the political challenges and all the roadblocks put in your way. But I think one of the biggest differences was we knew that redistricting was happening in 2021, no matter what. And so if we wanted it to change, we either had to make it change in 2018 or we could maybe try in 2020. But all of the research we had done said usually it takes multiple ballot attempts in order to get people to know enough about redistricting to know that they don't want gerrymandering and they do want an independent commission. And so even though everything was stacked against us, nobody believed that we could do it. Nobody would help us, especially in the beginning. I think our decision to stay focused and to say, even if we lose, at least we know we're setting ourselves up for success the next time around. I really think that is what made a really big difference in what we were doing.
Yeah, I think, the model makes sense, right? I think this is what a lot of folks are realizing, is that real community level change has to come from the community. It can't just parachute in from on high somewhere. When funding does that, it's really helpful to whatever the energy is on the ground, right? But it takes, months, years of hard work of people there who care about it, talking to one another. That's a key thing. We can't just post about it on Facebook, but having actual conversations makes a big deal. And I know that many of our listeners to this podcast and many of the members of Nanner are small organizations like VNP was in the beginning. Many are volunteer led, and they are by and large looking desperately for ways to gain traction in their community about the issue, right? So I kind of want to maybe just take a minute to talk about the nuts and bolts of like movement building, how we get there. I know getting it off the ground can be really hard. So for you, how did you go from 0 to 1? How did you take that first Facebook post, which obviously you posted on Facebook and got some traction, but then you translated that into action? What were the steps you took to make that happen?
Yeah, I think it's really been really interesting to look back on too. One of the if people are on social media, there's like a aspect on Facebook, but it's on other platforms too, where you can see what you had posted previously, like on that same day. And a couple months into the campaign, on my time hop or whatever it's called, it actually pulled up a post that was almost the exact same Facebook post that I had made that year. It said, I really want to do something about gerrymandering. Who wants to help? And then it was like a link to an article about how bad gerrymandering was in Michigan. The difference is, though, not a single person even liked it. And therefore, it was a fleeting thought, a status probably made during lunch that I never did anything about. And I emphasize that just because I think one of the absolute critical things to being able to sustain your own enthusiasm about a mission, no matter how excited you personally are about it or how passionately you feel about it, is you have to find other people who care about it too. And they do exist. Sometimes it feels like they don't exist. Maybe your family doesn't talk about politics, or your friends don't like your statuses that are trying to get at the root of the problem. Like gerrymandering is an issue I cared about for years, but really did feel like everybody else thought that who was being elected president was way more important, or issue A, B, and C of the day, which are all still important things. But, I kind of had this attitude of like, oh, I guess nobody else cares, so it's not worth pursuing. And so that Facebook post in an instance connected me with a bunch of people who I didn't know. Primarily, they were all strangers, actually, because it had just gotten shared into different political groups. And they were all kind of saying the same thing that I was feeling, which was like, I didn't know other people cared about this. I can't wait to do something about it. And I think that being able to find that core group of people and getting your message out there for other people to see is one of the most crucial first step. So like, what's your Facebook post? What is your one sentence about what you're trying to do? So mine was, hey, I want to help end gerrymandering in Michigan. If you want to help, let me know. I knew I couldn't do it on my own. I knew what I wanted to do, which was end gerrymandering. Now, it's a lot more complicated than that, because how you end gerrymandering could look a million different ways. But I think as I reflect on what was really important to get right in those first couple of days as we were starting to build momentum, it was knowing what we were fighting for, which was an end to partisan gerrymandering. And that was really specific because it wasn't a solution to get more Democrats elected or a solution to get more Republicans elected. It was to end partisan gerrymandering. And so our operations completely reflected nonpartisanship and finding a solution that didn't guarantee results for either party in the future. Why that was really important is some people weren't interested in that. They wanted to end gerrymandering, but for partisan reasons. And quickly they could kind of determine, well, this isn't the group for me. I'm going to go volunteer somewhere else, which helped us with being able to find the right people who would be motivated by the same mission and that would want to work towards the same goal. I think understanding why you're fighting for that is really important too. Although people come with their own reasons for fighting for things. If you're the leader of something, your personal motivation, you are going to have to tap into over and over and over again. And knowing why that is can be really helpful in the moments where you're questioning your decision making, you're questioning whether you should be doing this, or it feels like all the odds are against you and maybe you should just throw in the towel. And I think the last part is, what are the values that you're going to use in decision-making and structuring the organization? Now, it might sound really simple, and maybe it's because like I'm just a really values-driven leadership style. So if I don't have those answers, it's really hard for me to make decisions and go forward. But I think that part of why I was fighting to end gerrymandering is I really believed in democracy. And I really felt like the will of the people should be followed and that the consent of the governed should be what decides our elections. I was able to take those values and apply them to how we actually built the campaign and how we engaged with volunteers and how we structured our decision making. So we acted in a really transparent way so everybody could have the information they needed on what our goals were and how much money we had to raise and all that. We also included other people in the decision-making all along the way because I wasn't some brilliant person who knew about gerrymandering. I actually had to Google, how do you end gerrymandering after I made the Facebook post? But by creating like an open system that did allow many, many stakeholders to come to the table, we were able to take the brilliance of thousands of people and turn it into this campaign to really fight for, again, that core mission, that core value of creating a nonpartisan solution to gerrymandering. And so even if your issue isn't gerrymandering, I think what are those values? And then how do you make sure you're living those values? Because that will stand out. It's different than how a lot of organizations operate. think there's a lot of distrust in not only government, but in some of the institutional nonprofits that have been around for a while. Many who have done really amazing things, but as they get further away from trusting people or standing up or living the values that they're fighting for, the reason people are seeking them out to volunteer, I think it's people just have a million different options and they could be spending their time doing a million things. And so they're going to find somebody who does respect them and who does want their opinion as part of making the organization stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. It strikes me in there. You said something that made me think of a piece of advice that I got from one of my colleagues on my anti-gerrymandering campaign, where she said, no one is going to care about this more than you, right? Maybe not the issue, but the campaign itself. And she said, remember that, like, when it feels like someone's disinterested, it may not be that they're disinterested or that, part of your team is not as just passionate all the time, because this is, as the leader, sometimes it's lonely, right? And that you have to be the one to dig deep and to fuel that fire for yourself and for others, right? Now it is a team effort, but I have thought about that a lot, right? That when it feels lonely, sometimes that's the way it goes. Like that's
yeah, and it's hard to stick to those values that you want to run an organization by. It does not make everybody happy, especially when their motivations are different. But I think if you can be clear on that, even in the moments when it is lonely, you can at least feel good about what you're doing and kind of fall back on, like, well, at least I'm spending my time in a way that makes me feel good. Because there's so many decisions you make in this space, and especially during campaigns, and you as the leader have to stand by them. And so again, what's like that decision-making structure you use so that you can feel good about standing by any of those decisions?
Yeah. I am starting to take notes for a future episode about grit and perseverance in democracy reform, because I think that's something that we all could need to think about and to cultivate in our own lives.
Totally.
Now, the path to the ballot for you was not without hiccups and hurdles. Were there points that you thought about quitting, or at least handing it off to somebody else?
Definitely. And I think with a couple different themes. In the beginning, the last thing I wanted to do was screw this up. I had suddenly become friends with, at that time, a couple hundred people, but who were dedicating their time and energy. Like, all of us were talking at all hours of the day on this Facebook group that we made about, how are we going to make this happen? People were doing research. They were really taking it seriously. Yet I very clearly knew I didn't know how to amend the Constitution or even what the best solution to ending gerrymandering was. So I never felt like I really should even be the leader, because I didn't feel qualified enough to be doing that. So in the beginning, I think we were really searching for, like, well, who is the leader who maybe just didn't realize that there are hundreds of people who actually would be really motivated by doing this? And can we kind of work with them so that we can all be a part of that system? And that's when we started running into this tension between organizations who did have all of that expertise, but didn't really know how to treat people well, and didn't really know how to let volunteers or everyday Michiganders be a part of the process, be in the decision-making room, be some of the people who are having their opinions asked on what would we want this new solution to ending gerrymandering to look like. And that didn't vibe with our values and what we had already started creating that momentum for. So I think that in that moment, that's when I had to kind of come back to, well, what does this mean? And it meant more than just gerrymandering. To end gerrymandering, you need, if you're going with an independent commission, you have people in the room, everyday people in the room, talking about what they want representation to look like, talking about how they would have their community represented in their state capital or in Washington, D.C. And so if that wasn't even being a part of how we were creating this amendment, it kind of didn't feel right. It felt like maybe there were partisan motivations or funder motivations, and the motivations weren't actually trying to fix the solution. So this is one of the bigger parts. I think there was also, I was working a full-time job, getting my master's at the time, running some improv comedy groups, like a festival, trying to, be like a 27-year-old and have a social life. And it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of herding cats, especially in the beginning. And because I didn't know a lot of these people, is a lot of trust building. You know, they were literally internet strangers. Most of them didn't have real profile pictures. Like half of the first 3 months of organizing this, I was convinced everybody was a Russian spy. Um, and so there was kind of a moment, it was after the holidays, I think. So it must have been fairly early on, because I made the post in November. And then, yeah, I think it was right after the holidays, where I just was tired. I was really tired because I was burning the candle at both ends. And I kind of had this decision of like, am I really going to do this, or what am I going to give up so that I can do it? Turns out I gave up grad school and then the comedy and then everything else, you know, and eventually my full-time job. But it was one of those moments where I had to really look at and see that there were hundreds of people, even if we were brand new internet friends and it was just a Facebook group, but who in some way were trusting me. They had joined the cause. They had been deciding that, you know, as I was trying to hurt us, that I was worth listening to, and that we were working together on this thing. And it didn't feel right to walk away at that point. And I kind of had similar moments throughout where it got really exhausting and really stressful, and you're dealing with, especially if you have thousands of volunteers, lots of personalities and lots of issues you never anticipate. And but I think in those moments, I always kind of came back to like, what we're doing is bigger than me being uncomfortable in this moment. Like, it has the potential to impact every single election from 2021 forward for the rest of Michigan history, or until somebody amends the Constitution again. And future voters, even if I don't know them yet, like, they deserve a better system. So let's suck it up and keep working for a couple more months.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a quote that's, depending where you look, it's either, I think it's from Marianne Williamson, actually, that I think about a lot, that says, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. Right. And I think often we don't know how much we can do until we do it. And you start to learn, right, and maybe even believe a little bit that you can do way more than you thought you could. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after a word from some of our sponsors. If you're interested in learning how to win friends and save the Republic, then you should know about Reformers Unite, a new virtual networking event hosted by NANNER, the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. Each month, NANNER sets aside a couple of hours solely dedicated to helping our members share updates about their organizations and to build deeper connections between NANNER members throughout the country. Reformers Unite happens on Fridays and is only available to NANNER members. So get on over to nonpartisanreformers.org and become a member today. Are you tired of the politics of division and deadlock? Do you want to do something about it, but you don't know where to start? CitizenConnect.us is your way to learn about and engage with over 400 organizations who are dedicated to helping Americans right, left, and center work together to heal our democracy. Find the organization or event that speaks to you and help us get back to making our great nation work, because it only works when we work together. Learn more at CitizenConnect.us. All right, and now back to the show. So the measure was on the ballot in November 2018, and you won with 61% of the vote, right? Like a super majority, a mandate to some, although I would challenge the use of that term. But it doesn't mean that the work was over. There were still hurdles to get through, legal challenges, pushback from politicians and outside groups who didn't want to give up their power, and they sought to prevent the commission from being implemented. And so, with ballot measures like this, often, although not always, the person who is the campaign manager will stay on to ensure implementation goes smoothly and help kind of navigate the waters to make sure it gets all the way to where it needs to be. But that wasn't the case for you, right? So after a few months after the campaign ended, you left Voters Not Politicians to go work at the people. So I think it strikes me that in the democracy reform movement, and this is probably true in most businesses and organizations outside of politics, but it's very apparent in politics, that I think we tend to focus on the buildup and the win, but we don't talk about the decisions that come afterwards on that backside. like whether to stay on or to go, right? Or take a step back. I know you're still like a advisor, you're still attached to VNP. You didn't leave them and send them off into the ocean entirely, but uh, we don't talk about what it's like for you as that person who was up front to make those decisions and how you think through that. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about what that decision process was like for you?
It's probably one of the hardest and easiest decisions I've ever made. I mean, my life completely changed from the time I made that Facebook post to then, being the feature of a New York Times article. Because it was a Facebook post, there was so much attention put on me because it was like I was the 27-year-old who made this random Facebook post. And something I really struggled with was constantly trying to help people understand that, like, no, actually, there's literally thousands of us spending our time and energy and money. And like, I can't gather all these signatures on my own. I'm not a secret millionaire. I can't put TV ads up on my own. Like, this is bigger than that. And the other thing that we were doing in Michigan was not only amending our constitution, but we were changing what it looked like to make political change. There's kind of this fascination from like the local media reporters who report on our capital, Lansing, like, they're the beat reporters. They talk about everything in the legislature, any kind of ballot initiative that's coming up. And when we first came on, all of them were so skeptical. They were just like, who are you guys? What are you doing? This is not how change is made. You don't have money. You don't have your language written. You said you met on the internet. Like, you don't know any of the like donors or the other people who've done these initiatives before. Like, what is happening? And one of the really cool parts being the leader of this is I started also seeing that kind of that insecurity I felt in the beginning of like, well, I don't know anything. And like, I just know I want to end this and that I live here and I have the power to do it. But tons of our volunteers kind of felt that way, and primarily women too. There are a lot of people who kind of said, like, I've cared about this for a long time, but I never felt like I was qualified enough to actually do something about it. And throughout the campaign, we started seeing people growing this confidence in like, oh, wow, actually, I am a smart, intelligent person and I do listen and I am coming to this authentically and I can make change. And so we had like 17 people decide to run for local office just because they were a volunteer with voters, not politicians, because they saw that they actually do have power. And they then started seeing too, here's kind of some of the basic structure of how you do this. We were building tools as we went and having to figure out like, what does the petition process look like? All of that. So all of that to come back to this decision and the actual question you asked me is that, I had a lot of reflection on being that person at the center. And even as we had just done this monumental thing, the stories that were still being written were still primarily about me instead of like this movement and the fact that there had been this buildup of people who've clearly cared about this issue for a long time, and yet nobody was doing anything about it. And at the other end of it too, I also knew we had extremely capable co-leaders that were with me who had built up different aspects of the campaign the whole time. And many of them had grown confidence, but not all of them had grown enough, I think. And I wanted to just show that this is bigger than one person. This isn't just a Facebook post. This isn't just a flash in a pan. We have built an organization and a movement that will make change in Michigan for a really long time. And I don't know that this was the best way to prove that point, but I think I was also really exhausted. And as people were really excited to figure out what's the next issue going to be, one of the things I felt most passionate about was how do I help the other people who are where we were at a year and a half ago, which was we have this idea, we have some really good bones of momentum. Like there's a lot of people who are interested, but nobody's helping us. Nobody's helping explain how to navigate this process. And people are, sticking their noses up because we aren't the regular people who would be involved in this. And that's really where my passion was at. And I felt like after pretty much just suspending any of my personal needs for a year and a half, that like maybe I owed it to myself to really follow what I was feeling like was the most important thing, which was paying it forward and making sure that like we could continue this momentum. So I really wanted to let the organization be able to grow and make sure that people saw like while there was the most momentum that like it can actually keep going. I'm not the magical unicorn. It's just like democracy and people working together that is. And then also how do I take all this knowledge that's fresh in my mind and actually take the time to concentrate on creating like tools and resources and networks for other people trying to make change in their state.
I'm not the unicorn. Democracy is. That's a good That's a good quote. That may be the title of this episode.
I like it.
So you are now at The People. Tell us a little bit about the organization and what you all are working on.
Yeah, so we're fighting to make it so that every American can have trust in each other and our civic institutions once again. Super simple mission. We'll probably be done in a year. But it really was coming off of that momentum from Voters Not Politicians, wanting to help people, because we had gotten a lot of national attention. Like, we had gotten to go on different national news programs, and we'd been in a bunch of national newspapers. We had people from across the country reaching out saying, hey, I want to do that in my state. Andy, you and I got connected that way. Or there was like a guy who was trying to run as an independent in New Mexico and read about our campaign and decided to launch his campaign because of that. Like, all these little different stories. And what I started seeing is, like, they needed their Facebook post, which is probably a horrible analogy, but they needed to be connected to the other people who actually cared. And so The People really focuses on bringing people together who are having those aha moments of, I could keep living my life normally, but I just feel like I'm at a breaking point and I'm ready to actually try and make change, and connecting them to other people who are feeling that way, and then helping provide the tools and resources for them to be able to navigate the political process and identify that change. So we focus on connecting people. We do a lot of education events, a lot of bridge building events where people can come and see, like, maybe they all live in a state, like, I'll use Oklahoma as an example. Well, I'll use New Hampshire, actually. That's where we have a lot of programming right now. So, like, in New Hampshire, a lot of people who are kind of raising their hand saying, I'm really sick of polarization, but I'm not sure what to do about it. And we have them come together, talk about what they're frustrated with, and then identify where they have common ground, and then figure out, do they want to do something about it, and then build the plan for doing something about it. So that's been really, really exciting to build and be a part of it. We really focus on connecting people, giving them the tools and resources to identify kind of the core of their frustrations when it comes to political reform, and then help them start those reforms and hopefully amend their own constitutions.
Yeah. Well, and you started this in March of 2019, and then a year later, of course, the pandemic hit, which undoubtedly changed how you do your work, as it has for everybody, I think. And on top of that ongoing pandemic, we're also living in this extremely caustic partisan environment, like you referenced. People in New Hampshire feel that way. People everywhere feel that way. Michigan in particular, right? Although I know you all work in a number of states. From the insurrection on January 6th, there's been attempts to undermine and in some cases thwart our small d democratic institutions, including threats of violence, even lodged at the Michigan Independent Commission, right? Today, we're recording this on Friday, December 17th. And at least in my state, a whole bunch of schools are closed today or on alert because of some vague TikTok threat. I'm not super aware of even what the details are. But it's a scary time, right? So how's that affected you? How's that affected The People as an organization? And how does that affect your approach to doing democracy reform?
Yeah, it's been a lot. I mean, just from being a brand new nonprofit that then got hit by the pandemic, when your primary organizing model is in-person bridge building, it's been really long, really, really long pandemic for me. But at the same time, we have found more people than ever that feel super isolated, and also like they don't know what they can do to make a difference, but who know they want to. Kind of, again, that aha moment of like, now is the time where I'm going to at least try to do something, even if I don't know what it is or what it's going to lead to, which is where I was at with that Facebook post. And I think I've been really reminded of why this work is so important, because I think the stakes have never been higher, which sounds really dramatic to say, but it genuinely feels that way. It feels like if we keep just, when it comes to reforms and how reforms are won, let's say, my big belief is like it should come from the people who live there, but also should be intentionally being built to bridge differences. Like, we should be bringing people in because we do share a want for accountability and responsiveness from our government. I have seen it in all 50 states. I've worked with people in literally all 50 states, and people want that same thing. It doesn't matter if you're red, blue, purple, we want that. And so if we don't start with that, yes, maybe we fix gerrymandering because we were able to shove a lot of money at it and get something passed, but that's such a short-term Band-Aid because we haven't actually fixed our civic institutions and our civic life and how we work together and how we build trust in things because we took the time to make sure people understand how to engage with them. I mean, in Michigan, our commission could have been a disaster because it relies heavily on public comment. And it came out and didn't even start like getting applicants until after the pandemic when people were worried about their life, let alone like, oh, I guess I'm going to apply for this random commission I've never heard of, even if they voted on it. And yet, because of that really hard work that we did in non-pandemic times, there were record public comments compared to any other piece of legislation that's been heard in our state. Thousands of people for now over or just about a year, like participating in this process, which is really exciting and cool. And to me, it just reaffirms why that work's so important. And I think too, if we don't do it right now, it kind of feels like whoever is the most persistent is going to win out. So if there's people trying to drive violence, like where are the people trying to drive peace? Or if there's people trying to get rid of democracy, where's the people driving to fight for democracy and show why it is the unicorn of inspiration, but also why our country is so great. And so it's been really motivating on that end. We're working a lot more. Probably in 2019, we were really focused on just reforms. How do we get people doing more ballot initiatives? Or like in New Hampshire, working in the legislature with their legislator. We're still definitely doing that. But actually, as we go into 2022, a lot of our programming has shifted to that bridge building piece of, again, we identify and we see people every day raising their hand who are from different ends of the political spectrum saying, I'm really frustrated, who haven't maybe had that moment of like, oh, and I could end gerrymandering to make myself less frustrated. They're not there yet. They're kind of more at the beginning of the pipeline, if probably not the best wording, but we're really focused on how do we help then people talk to each other and build their capacity for having those conversations and for being able to listen to each other and identify shared concerns and be able to then take power from that instead of just like a talking head on TV who's maybe trying to polarize them. So I think with the pandemic, it's been interesting, but it really has brought a lot more people to that breaking point of, instead of watching Netflix tonight, maybe I will show up to a random Zoom meeting where I'm going to talk to a bunch of strangers, which sounds scary, but it feels necessary. And I think we just have to take people's willingness to engage on top of being exhausted with everything else really seriously right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. From my experience, people are still interested, right? Maybe not everyone, because we're all trying to get through, right? We've got other stressors that are occupying our time, but our ability to engage when it matters often means that person is going to be more deeply engaged and for longer. And it's a great way, I think, to identify some of your super volunteers, right? Who will be the ones that are at your side as you do your important work and try to save our democracy, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And hopefully for us, it's really like, hopefully they're recognizing they have the power to do that too. They don't have to wait for somebody else to come and fix it. They are just as capable to do it.
Yeah. Katie, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much.
My guest today has been Katie Fahey, Executive Director of The People. You can learn more about them and connect with them at thepeople.org. Thanks for listening to How to Win Friends and Save the Republic. This podcast is a program of the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. For more information about our organization and how you can join, please visit our website at nonpartisanreformers.org.